ultimately everything is rooted in ignorance. That really is the root of all mental defilements, of all suffering, of all dis-ease.
If you want your life to change, ask the right questions, and your mind will actually scan and try to find the answers to those questions. A lot of people are asking the wrong questions, right?
Right. And whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that becomes the inclination of the mind.
So your mind is just a tool, it's just a computer, and it just goes off of what question you ask it, and it will give you the answer for those questions, or at least it will guide you to the answer.
You bring deep down, on the deepest level, we already have the answers to the questions we're asking. So, you know, in cognitive behavioral therapy, there's something called a negative automatic thought, NAT, and this would be a thought that an individual would go to sort of automatically, right? Hence the name, and a lot of times it's a hurtful thought or something that's going to hinder one's abilities or thinking process. Or performance. And sometimes even just saying these things out loud, you know, they sound pretty ridiculous. And, you know, when I'm in the office with patients and we sort of say these things out loud, it's like the patients affect, they cringe a lot of the times to like actually vocalize these things out loud. In actuality, these things are happening all the time. Like you said, you know, and the thought stream is incessant. And, you know, if we could sort of have a recorder on what sort of content our minds are secreting, and then play that back, you know, no one would want to be friends with that individual saying those things. And yet that's sort of the internal stimuli that we get, and is our own voice. A lot of the times.
Yeah, so you mentioned it before with your patients. You said that there are some thoughts that kind of go under the radar that most people, like most of your patients, may not be even, they might not be aware of those thoughts that are under the radar that are constantly just going. But those thoughts are actually they're the driving force for how those people live their lives and how most people live their lives.
Right.
But like you said before, once you shine light on those thoughts, then it's like, well, those are ridiculous. Like, why would I ever let those thoughts control me, right? Why would I ever let those thoughts be the driving force for my life? But the fact is, when you're unaware of thoughts that are dictating how you live your life and how you go through your day-to-day process, when you're unaware of those thoughts, that's essentially what it means to be unconscious.
Right, that's exactly
So the
it.
first step is always taking a third-person perspective onto what thoughts am I having, what are the majority of the thoughts that I have in my daily life, and just taking a third-person perspective on that and saying, are these things true, and are these the thoughts that I want to live my life by?
Right.
If we ask the question, what is humanity's greatest addiction? What are some conventional things that people would come up with if we were to say, what is the greatest addiction that humanity has?
I would imagine people would say things like TV, sports, food, drugs, alcohol.
Yeah. But I think there's actually one thing that people are more addicted to, and that's what we've been talking about. That's thoughts, and more on a deeper level, it's problems, or our association with problems. For some reason, we're so addicted to problems because problems make us seem significant, right? Problems make us seem unique, because if I have a problem and I identify with that problem, I'm different from everybody else, right? Like, my circumstances and that victim mentality makes me seem significant. And I think a lot of us fall under that trap. It's an addiction, because it makes us almost feel good in a weird way when we identify as us being the victim and all these things being against us. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. The problems, we can identify them with them, and then a lot of the times the problem becomes the form of distraction, right? So if the mind is occupied getting caught up in problem, we'll say problem A, and identifying with it and thinking about the repercussions of that problem, how am I going to solve it, and really just getting caught up in it, then there's, we'll just call problem here distraction, right? Yeah. So all the other addictions, it could be distractions as well, and what they're distracting us from is from our own minds, the feelings of discomfort, the dis-ease that arises when we have to really sit and be with ourselves, when we strip away the problems, right? And the thing is that the mind will, again, say anywhere but here, and even if we strip away that problem, if we could wave a magic wand and make problem A go away, there will be another problem that the mind will obsess over. And if that one, if we wave a magic wand and that one goes away, there will be another problem. So the mind will undergo this sort of treadmill of getting caught up again and again in the problems. And it's like, ties back into one of the things we talked about in the first video with the dissatisfaction, right? With the chronic unsatisfactoriness of really all things, right? Because all things are impermanent and not lasting. And so a lot of times what we end up doing is we end up clinging to the pleasant, the pleasant thoughts, or having an aversion to the unpleasant thoughts or the unpleasant problems. And then that becomes sort of the recurring cycle of our patterns.
And I think one thing that like viewers could do is to actually start being more aware and conscious of how this is manifesting our addiction to problems, how it manifests in your immediate world, such as if you turn on the news, like when's the last time you turn on the news and they're just like, hey, everything's a-okay today, everything's good right now with how everything is, let's be thankful, let's be grateful. No, like, that doesn't sell, right?
Right.
Problems sell. And like horrible things, there's energy behind those things, and it gets attention.
Right.
So they will throw as much of that in your face in order for you to just cling on to it and to whatever it takes to get your attention. And that's what they'll do. And
you talk to 10 people on the street and you ask, hey, do you like what's on the news? 9 or 10 out of 10 people say, no, I hate what's on the news. And yet there's so many people watching the news and just feeding into the cycle, and sort of precipitating and prolonging the issue. So we have the irony is that we have an aversion to suffering or dis-ease or dissatisfaction or unhappiness, and yet we do all the very things that cause those things to continue. Like continue to watch the news, continue to complain about the news, and just because it's another way to get caught up in something else, right? If I'm hooked on this thing and this is distracting me from internally what's happening inside of the self, we'll say, then really what that ends up doing is more time away from myself, right? So if I tell you that you have 12 hours left in existence as a human being, how many of those hours would you spend watching the news?
None.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that's really what it is. We have a timeline in this human existence, and it's an unknown timeline. And within this timeline, there are going to be 4 things that are going to happen. We're going to have birth, aging, sickness, and death. And so a lot of the times these problems, they're ways to distract us from these truths, right? Distractions of aging, distractions of sickness, distractions from death, right? If we have a loss in someone close to us that has passed, that can be very difficult, and so that could take the form of a problem, right? Identifying with the problem. Oh, I had this happen. This is my problem. This is why I can't get to X, Y, or Z, right? You said earlier it can be very easy to sort of say there's this going on, and this is why I can't do X, Y, or Z, right? It's a lot more difficult to say everything that's happened is my responsibility, and I take full accountability for it, right? That's really what's going to help get one out of their problems, and it's not what anyone wants to hear. It's not the sexy sell, right? Nobody wants to hear that. Ultimately, everything is rooted in ignorance. That really is the root of all mental defilements, of all suffering, of all dis-ease. So if we know that, then we can well, that might not be intuitively obvious with whatever problem we're experiencing, but that's what I found is the reality of the situation based off of my own direct experience, is that there hasn't been any circumstance that was perceived as unfavorable that wasn't rooted in ignorance.
Yeah. And you can see that ignorance being, like we said before, in the news and all that stuff, and people watch these things. They watch reality TV shows, for an example, and all the ignorance that is there. But again, it's a sexy sell because there's so much energy behind it, and the problems we're so drawn to it.
Right.
But then people spend their times watching these shows, and then they wonder why in their own life they have all these problems, right? Why are my relationships not working out? Why are all these things happening to me? It's because we're putting attention. When you're putting attention on something externally, you're also putting attention on it internally, right? So
that's exactly it, right?
Yeah, and people are always wondering, why is my life so full of problems? Well, take a look at what you're watching most of the time on TV. Take a look at the conversations that you have with most people. What is the premise of those conversations? Is it complaining? Is it looking forward for the future? Or is it reminiscing only about the past?
Right.
What is the basis, the foundation of most of your conversations? Now you're going to actually get down to the crux of why your mind, why you think the way you think, and what thoughts you allow, like you said, in the home of your mind and in the home of your consciousness. Which thoughts are you allowing as guests, right? And it all has to do with attention, which brings us into the next topic of how to put attention on what we want in our lives, as opposed to putting attention on things that we don't really want, right? And that all comes down to being just aware of what we put attention on.
Right. And so what might be helpful in this instance to decide, well, what do I need to put my attention on, is, well, is what I'm experiencing right now favorable, unfavorable, or neutral? Right. So that might help us serve as a guide to steer us in the right direction on what types of thoughts we need to be fostering.
Yeah.
Right. We might have the perception of a pleasant feeling that in reality is not really a pleasant feeling, right? Like an example of this would be the reality TV show example you just mentioned, right? Getting lost and having these pleasant feelings, watching these TV shows that really, they're not helpful. It's not producing anything fruitful for oneself. So the pleasant feeling is deceptive, right? It's actually unpleasant, but there's ignorance rooted in the action. So because of that ignorance, we're not seeing clearly. And because of that, we might continue to engage and proliferate these seemingly pleasant feelings that in the end don't really help us out. So that would actually be something that we would not want to focus our attention on, and really but that realization would only come with more sort of a deeper analysis of, hey, what am I doing right now? How is this helping me? And through that analysis, we might begin to see that how it's, oh, this is not helping me actually.
We've identified the present moment as something that is changeless. At least the space of this moment is changeless. We're not talking about the physical. We're talking about that space underlying the physical that allows everything to change. So the changeless reality, we spoke about that in the first video. So the thing that really inhibits us from seeing that, human beings, is the thoughts, is the voice in the head and our identification with that. That usually serves as a barrier to going deeper, peeling back that layer, going deeper to awareness.
Right.
And then from awareness, going even deeper and seeing that the present moment is actually absolute. But the first barrier for most people to see what's really underneath what's happening is to transcend thought. And a lot of this has to do with observing just that voice in your head, taking time out of your day. And it can be done anywhere. You can practice, this is this mindfulness. You can just practice being mindful at the gas station, in the grocery store, at school, at your job, but just taking a moment to take a step back from what's running through your head and just paying attention. And even for people watching the video, they could even pause the video right now. Just take 5 minutes to sit there, do nothing, and watch what images arise in the mind, what the voice is saying in the mind, without clinging to anything. And there's a saying that Eckhart Tolle has. He says that you can watch thoughts just like watching clouds pass by overhead, laying down on the park and just watching clouds pass by. You can do the same thing with thoughts when you take a transcended view of consciousness onto your thoughts.
Right, and that brings up a good point in that if we conceptualize clouds and we think, where do clouds go? Who owns the clouds?
Yeah.
Where is the home for the clouds?
Yeah.
And the answer to that question is they have no home. They're just they're transient. They come and go.
They're recycled energy. It's recycled energy, and that's all that thoughts are. It's recycled energy.
Right.
So
that's one way of looking at it. Yeah.
Another thing Eckhart Tolle says that's really cool is that was a good analogy for me to understand, is that most people treat their thoughts like a dog who's just walking along in the park and picks up a scent and sniffs that scent for miles, runs for miles and miles and miles, lifts its head up and says, where have I gone, right? And that's how a lot of us treat our thoughts. The first thought that comes into our mind, we just follow it, right? We just follow wherever it takes us instead of watching the thought and say, do I want to actually follow where this thought takes me, or do I want it to just pass on and see what else my mind has to offer me, right? And you could also, another analogy is like if you're in those big Las Vegas buffets, right? There's a huge line of food, right? And usually what they do in these buffets is they put the starchy food in the front so you get full quicker. And most people don't know this, but if you weren't to know this, then you would just go to the front, you pack up all this starchy food, right? And then you'd go back to your table, eat that up,
right?
And then when you came back around for seconds, you'd see all the good stuff at the end of the table. You'd be too sick and tired to get the good stuff, right? So the best approach is to actually, before you even take anything, is to scan all the food that's there on the table.
Ideally, right?
Ideally, yeah. Scan all the food that's on the table. You can do the same thing with your thoughts. Scan everything. Like, what do you actually want to take? What do you actually want to consume? What do you actually want to follow? And this is an internal process. It's something that you have to do internally within yourself. You have to just take the time to just open up that awareness within you of those thoughts that are always going through your mind, and say, is this thought helpful for me? Does this thought contribute to my goals, my bigger dreams, or is it a limiting thought? And if it's a limiting thought, there's a saying that says, what you resist persists. So don't say, oh, I don't want to be thinking this thought anymore, because you're putting attention on it when you do that. Instead, what you should do is say, oh, you know what, I don't like that thought, so just let it pass, right?
Right.
There's going to be more thoughts that flow. Just let it to flow. Don't cling. Like the Buddha says, the root of suffering is clinging, right, or attachment. So it's really about putting attention on what you want in your life. And the more and more you do this, starting with your thoughts, putting attention on those thoughts that are favorable over the ones that are unfavorable, without totally getting lost in it, always having that third person perspective, realizing I am absolute, and the space of this moment is absolute. I'm fine with how everything is right now, and I only put attention on what I want in my life to manifest. And life is a process of just continually doing that, and you'll see that you'll find that your life completely changes when you start putting attention on what you want, as opposed to what you don't want.
Right. And it's a constant practice, a constant conditioning, a constant refinement process. If we don't really engage in these sorts of practices, we lose that conditioning, right? If we don't go to the gym for 6 months, 12 months, if we're in bed for 2 to 4 weeks because of a surgery, we decondition. So the mind is the same way. So it's a constant refinement process to figure out which thoughts do I need to continue nurturing, which seeds do I need to continue watering to help them recur again, right? The greatest predictor of an event happening is if it's happened before. So whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that becomes the inclination of the mind. So if we entertain the useful thoughts, even if we're just quote unquote lying to ourselves, right? There's that phrase, fake it till you make it, or fake it till you become it. The idea there is you proactively have a positive thought, or you have a thought that might be fruitful, and then you just believe it, and even if it's a lie, you believe it anyway. And then eventually, if you believe this lie that you've had a day in, day out for 6 months, 12 months, 36 months, eventually it's going to come to fruition, just like negative automatic thoughts come to produce distorted core beliefs. So it's the same process, just the one that is more helpful for the mind, and not giving you being a disservice.
So you could say you're essentially reprogramming your mind when you do that.
That's exactly it, right? The mind undergoes a neuroplastic programming. So there's a term, neuroplasticity, which refers to the fact that the way the neurons are firing together, it can be rewired. And this is a process that not just really young human beings can do, older adults can do as well. And so the take-home message is that everything is plastic. Nothing is static. Everything is always changing, and we need to realize that that's happening so we can capitalize it and really continuously mold ourselves and our thought patterns, and the thoughts that we're having every day continuously.
So that's a good point. So that with the reprogramming, just a few things you could do is put down turn off the TV, put your phone down, and start looking within yourself, looking at what do I want from or a better question is what does life want out of me? That's a deeper question that you can ask, and then the answers will start flowing through you. Now a good thing to do is start putting attention on those answers. A really big thing in the self-help space is if you want your life to change, ask the right questions, and your mind will actually scan and try to find the answers to those questions. A lot of people are asking the wrong questions, right? A lot of people are saying, why does this happen to me? Why does my life suck? Or why can't I get into these relationships? Your mind will give you the answer, but it's not productive. It's not gonna produce anything productive for you. It's not going to make any change. A better question to ask is if you're always finding yourself in the pattern of being in a relationship, being in a destructive relationship, is how do I enter into a loving relationship, something like that.
Right.
Now your mind will start finding answers for you. So your mind is just a tool. It's just a computer, and it just goes off of what question you ask it, and it will give you the answer for those questions, or at least it will guide you to the answer.
You bring up a good point in that deep down, on the deepest level, we already have the answers to the questions we're asking. We don't know, like you said, we might not be asking the right questions, and the answers might not be apparent because there are so many layers, right? So the idea is to, one, ask the right questions, two, strip away the layers, and then get down to what will actually be helpful. Toll actually says at the beginning of the book Power of Now that there's nothing in this book that I'm going to tell you that deep down inside on some level you don't already know. And I love that, because that's truth.
Yeah,
truth prevails.
The truth prevails.
And so that was really that really sort of sets the stage for sort of what this is. It's just a practice to refine ourselves and to understand that we really have all the tools already innately in our toolbox.
Yeah.
We might just have not, we may have misplaced where the toolbox is. And in terms of, we were talking about ways this can be applicable to viewers in terms of daily practices. One that, it will be one exercise that viewers can practice is to consider, whenever I have the thought, this is a waste of my time, right, which might happen one or multiple times a day, then with that thought, say, well, how can I be more present with what's happening right before my eyes, right? Because the only difference between boredom and engagement is the amount of attention, right? One can be doing anything as long as they're conscious and feel engaged and not be bored, okay, if there is attention, if there's presence, okay? So if that thought comes in, this is a waste of my time, counter that with the thought, well, what can I be doing now that might be helpful, that might serve me toward my goal, toward what I want to do later on. Maybe it's maybe I'll be mindful of my breath, or how's my posture right now? How's my breathing? How is my how are my lungs doing? Am I experiencing pain in the body? Right? Even like doing like a mini body scan when we're waiting to pump gas, or on the elevator. How's my breath?
Everything we've been talking about, I think it all boils down to taming the mind and making it work for you. Right.
Because you mentioned your buffet line example earlier. One I wanted to give was seeing our minds like 2-year-old children. Okay, that's really what's happening. Our minds are not refined at baseline. Our minds are all over the place. And so 2-year-old children, what do? They'll crawl over the place. They'll go downstairs. They'll put their fingers in sockets. Right. They'll put their hands on hot stoves. So we have to train the mind, and that's really the art form that it comes down to. And we have to make the mind work for us.